Good morning, guys. Solomon with iCode Stuff here, bringing you back another video on this lovely morning. It's currently 5:20 here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live. Got up early, just felt like, hey, you know what? I really want to showcase one of these packages that I've been working on in my spare time. And so I said, hey, let's do it. Let's record this video this morning. So today, I just want to showcase a Laravel package I've been working on for the past few weeks now called LaDocumenter. It's based off of one of my old Laravel packages called Documenter that I had on my personal repo. So I basically refactored it, changed it up, added a logo, renamed it, and said, hey, let's open source this and let's showcase it. Basically what it allows you to do, it allows you to generate beautiful API documentation for your Laravel API routes, just using annotations. And so an example of the generated code or generated documentation can be seen at one of my dev sites, HoopSpots. So the first thing you see when you go to HoopSpots takes you to the overview page. I haven't added anything in the overview page, but if you want to see the actual endpoints, such as like the login endpoints, we can see, the endpoint, the URI, if it requires authentication, required body params, an example response, whether it be a 200 code, and then we can see the actual JSON content, or we can see an example error response, which is a 401. And so this is all generated using annotations in your code. So yeah, let me pull up PHP Storm and show you what that looks like in a real project. So we got PHP Storm open. So this is the app I've been working on, or the API for the app I've been working on, HoopSpots. And so let's check out a controller. We'll check out the HoopSpot controller. And if we look at the top of the class, we have this group annotation, which basically groups a bunch of endpoints into one group. And so it's based off of your controller class. So if you look at each controller and we go to the top, we can see there's always a group. And without the group, you get a really wonky name for your actual endpoint. So if we look back at the documentation, if you don't add a group, it'll say something like auth controller, whatever it might be. So it's not, it's not too descriptive. So you definitely want to use the groups whenever you have the power to. So cool. And then the next thing that we want to look at is an actual endpoint annotation. So a single endpoint is basically what we have here. So if we look at the basic login, that's a single endpoint, and we have a description for the endpoint. We have the method for the endpoint, which is automatically generated from your routes file. We have the URI also generated from your routes file. And then we have this, if it requires authentication, which checks if it requires auth middleware, such as Sanctum or the regular auth. And if you have a custom auth, you can actually change that in your config file in the LaDocumenter. And so, but yeah, so this is just really just showcasing what it looks like so far. My plan is to actually create a new Scratch or new Laravel application from scratch to showcase, just how it works, and starting from the beginning to the end of implementing, beautiful documentation with LaDocumenter. So let's do it. Let's hop in our terminal and get at it. Let me zoom in, clear. So we're just going to create a new Laravel project. We're just going to say Laravel new LaDocumenter showcase. All right, let that go. So our Laravel installation has just been complete. So we are going to open up PHP Storm, or let's first CD into the project. So CD LaDocumenter showcase. Clear that, and let's open up PHP Storm. All right, so we got PHP Storm open. It's a fresh Laravel install. Oh, as always, I'm gonna have to zoom in so that you guys can see what I'm looking at. Oh man, these fans are blowing hard. Second video in a row, my MacBook Pro is just going berserk at the moment. But yeah, let's zoom in, update these preferences, change this to a size 17, I believe I did last time. And then for the actual editor itself, let's do the same thing. So preferences, editor, font. Let's go to this right here. Change that to a 17. And we are set. So like as I said, we have a fresh Laravel install. I'm not going to add anything like Valet or Homestead. I'm just going to use a regular PHP artisan serve when we get to the end. But yeah, let's start from the beginning. So let's head over to the repo and let's follow the steps. So the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to use or download the recipe. The recipe is basically a way to showcase documentation using Markdown. And so if we go to the recipe, this is the site. I believe I showcased it in the last video, but not 100% sure. But yeah, if you're looking to just write general documentation using Markdown for your Laravel applications, I think the recipe is to go to. And so yeah, so the way it works is it compiles your annotations into Markdown, and then it's served by the recipe. So let's require that. Composer require. Open up our terminal using Composer 2, so it should be much faster. All right, while that's doing that, we'll grab the next command, which is just installing the recipe. Cool. And if we go to our config, we should have a new config called the recipe. That looks good. All right, next thing we're going to want to do is actually install my package, LaDocumenter. Put that into the terminal. Should be pretty quick. And then let's copy this next step, which is just publishing the config file. Cool. And then if we look at it, we have LaDocumenter out as our in our config. So yeah, if we look at the actual structure of it, it basically, I do have some comments to help people out. So it automatically checks if a route requires auth middleware, and so if you have custom auth, make sure you add it into this array. It only documents the API routes, so if you have a different routes file, you might have to specify that. And then it uses the default controller path, which that doesn't look right. It should be like this, but I'll update that later. And then any external pages that you have, it'll any external pages for the recipe that you want to show, you want to add it in this array. So yeah, the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create an API controller. So let's just say PHP artisan make controller API controller. And as I said earlier, the first thing that you want to do when you create a controller is add the group annotation. Group. And we have name, and we'll call it API. We can give it a description, just say this manages the API endpoints. Cool. And then the next thing that we can do is create an actual controller function. We'll just call this public function foo. And this will be, we're going to simulate it as if it's just a regular GET request. And so what we can do here is, I don't know, let's make an array. We'll just say array equals some data, foo bar. I think that should be enough actually. And then let's return that as a JSON response. Array. Cool. And so that's going to be our regular GET request. And the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add the endpoint annotation. You need to do that for every single controller method that you want to document. Without it, it's just going to skip it. And so, yeah, let's add a name. We'll call this foo description. This is a test endpoint. All right. And then if we want to add like any query parameters or GET request, we can add request here. Let's say we want to add in let's validate a query parameter called Baz. and we just want to we're going to expect it to be a string, and then we can add baz to our array. And then if you want to document a query parameter, all you have to do is utilize the query parameter annotation. And so if you go back to the docs or the repo, we can see we have multiple annotations. We have the group annotation, endpoint annotation, the body parameter, the query param, and then a response example, which uses a JSON file to generate the actual documentation. So yeah, so let's create the query parameter annotation. We'll give it a name, baz. It expects a type. We'll call it string. The status, if it's required or optional, we'll just say it's optional here. And description. This is a test query param. All right. And so the last thing we're going to want to add is actual response example. So currently it only uses a file to generate your response. So we'll say status first is 200, and then the response file is going to be whatever we add here in the storage directory. So let's create a responses directory, and let's call this foo.json, and we know that there's going to be foo and there's going to be baz, so we're going to say foo here, bar baz bet. Cool. And then what we can do here now is we can link it to the JSON file that we just created. So you might be asking, you know, that's a bit of a manual process. Why do I need to generate a JSON file before I can do that? And it is up front. However, in my other project, if I actually open it up real quick, 1 second. Here's my other project for HoopSpots, the API. And so the way I have it set up at the moment is I have feature tests running, and for each feature test that's testing an endpoint, we could check out a HoopSpot controller test. It's writing our documentation for us into our storage directory. So the way it works is, here, let me minimize this, minimize that. All right, cool. So the way it works is we have the right documentation path, and so this is testing the HoopSpots controller. So we have the document path called HoopSpots, so that's just for our directory. And then if we look at the actual method, we have write documentation, it expects the path, then expects the route, whatever route we're testing, expects a status code, and then it actually expects the JSON content. And so when you run the test automatically, it generates that JSON response file for you, so you don't have to do it. So if you don't have, you know, feature tests set up, this might motivate you to actually write feature tests in your project so that you can automatically update your documentation. And so if we look at the actual write documentation, we can see, yeah, write documentation. So it's using a try catch block. So it's, you know, you're making your file system, creating your file name, file path, and then adding it to the local disk. And then when I want to copy it over to a different directory, I can do that. So I have it set up to be tracked by Git. So the way it's working right now is it's adding it to your local disk, which isn't tracked by Git. But then what I can do is I can copy it over and I can bring it into this responses directory if I wanted to. And so that's kind of how I've been automatically generating responses. Cool. Let's go back to our code. And yeah, so that looks good so far. I'm not sure if there's any errors. So what we can go ahead and do is go back to the repository, and we can run the command. Oh, looks like I'm missing the command for it. So we have this command called, so we do PHP artisan. It might be a bit small, still haven't figured out how to zoom in on the terminal, but we have this LaDocumenter generate command. So what we can do is run that PHP artisan LaDocumenter generate, which won't work right now because we haven't added the actual endpoint to the routes file. So what we need to do here is we can do route get, one second. Let's enable the Laravel plugin real quick. Just realized it's a new project, so I have to manually do that. So let's go here, Laravel, enable plugin, apply, okay. All right, cool. So we can then go to our API controller, or no, create our URI. We'll call this foo. And then what we can do here is create our actual API controller at foo, give it a name foo. And what we can do here now is we can run the PHP artisan LaDocumenter generate. Let's see how it goes. It does provide feedback, a check or an X if it was successful or not. So let's run it. So it looks like it skipped it because the API controller does not exist. So let's use the full namespace actually. So API, I don't know if it, let's see if the plugin will work for me. Controllers, API controller. Nope, you know what I need to do actually is I need to go to the route service provider and enable, yep, let's change this like that. Go back. Cool, now we should be able to run it. Cool, so now it looks like we were able to generate our documentation perfectly fine. So let's run PHP artisan serve so we can see what it looks like. And I believe it's going to be /docs for the actual route. So what we can do is one /docs API, and as we can see, we have this endpoint, and we have the actual method for it. We have the URI. We have if it requires authentication or not, and then we can see any query parameters that it requires, and then we can see an actual JSON response. So that looks good so far. Let's create a post request. Call this public function bar, and we'll require a request, and we'll say we'll validate request needs, let's say a name, which will be a string. And this is, I mean, I probably shouldn't even be doing this since it really doesn't matter, but this is how it would actually work in a real world Laravel application. And so, yeah, I really just need to showcase the annotations, but I just want to be as realistic as possible of how, you know, the actual endpoint would work. So we'll just add these validated fields, even though we're not going to test it out. So and then we'll say email, which will be email, and it's required. Cool. And then let's create an array. We'll just call it name is request name, email is request email, return response JSON array. Cool. So let's generate some dot blocks. All right, first thing we're going to want to do again is add endpoint, give it a name, bar. We'll say description, this is testing a post request or post route or post endpoint. And let me copy this, paste it up here. And I'm going to say this is get endpoint. And then we have this other parameter, or not parameter, but annotation, body parameter. So body param, it's basically the same thing as query param, but just different annotation names. So you have the name still, you have type, status, and description. So we'll say name, it's going to be name, type, we'll say string, status is required, description, give user a name. All right. Next thing we're going to do, add another body param, name, call it email, type, email, status is required, description, give a user an email. All right. And then let's create our JSON file, call it bar.json, name, we'll just say Solomon, email is, we'll just use my iCode stuff email, iCodestuff.io. All right. And then let's add our response example annotation, status 200, and then file is going to be responses, foo, or not foo, but bar.json. Cool. And so let's run our command again, PHP artisan LaDocumenter generate. Oh, forgot to add it to the API route, so we'll go to route post bar API controller at bar, name it bar. I just said bar a lot. Cool. So it looks like both of our endpoints have been generated. So let's rerun our server. PHP artisan serve. Let's give it a refresh. All right. And so if we look at the top, we have foo and we have bar, and we also have the endpoints on the side over here. And so now we can see our body parameters, name, email, and then we can see our content. You can also generate extra response examples for a single endpoint. So if I want to say error.json message, this is an error, and then we can add that to our response example as well, just to showcase, hey, if you're missing the required parameters, it's going to return an error. So let's say status is 400, file responses error.json, rerun our command. Oop. PHP artisan, there we go. Serve it again, refresh, and then we have an example error response as well. So that's really the LaDocumenter package. We're at about 20 something minutes right now. Didn't mean to make it that long again. It's looking like my videos on average are coming out to about 20-25 minutes. So just expect that moving forward. But yeah, so LaDocumenter is completely available. It's on Package Gist right now. I'm gonna make a post on Reddit, just sharing it and showcasing it. And so yeah, go ahead and download it if you guys are interested in using it. The other alternative that does something similar is, I think Marcel has a, what is it? Laravel API documentation generator, and I used this for a while. However, I just didn't really like the way it looked. Let me rephrase that. It's not that I didn't like the way it looked. I just like the way the recipe generated its documentation a lot better than this package. And so this is a more mature package, and you might want to use it for your projects. But if you're just trying to test out and you're a hobbyist, go ahead and use LaDocumenter. I don't really see any harm. Open up any issues or PRs that you might see fit. But yeah, so there we are. Meet LaDocumenter. All right, guys, I will see you in the next video. Take care.